The Stelzenrieder family originated from Germany and immigrated to the USA, settling in a cabin within a small locality named Saxtown, which sat a few miles south of modern-day Mielstadt near Belleville, Illinois. The cabin and surrounding fields were the property of 36-year-old Karl Friedrich August Stelzenrieder, who was more commonly known as Fritz. His father, 65-year-old Karl, resided in his son's property along with Fritz's 28-year-old wife, Anna Tatje, and the couple's two young children, 3-year-old Karl and 8-month-old Anna. The Stelzenrieders struggled during the economic depression, however they were known to be hard-working and highly respected by the locals of Saxtown. In the late afternoon of the 20th of March 1874, a Mr. Schneider, neighbour of the Stelzenrieders, wandered towards the cabin to request potato seeds. However, he was met with an eerie silence on the farm. The cows and horses had not been fed, which struck him as odd. He knocked on the door, but there was no answer. Schneider observed the cabin's surroundings, then opened the front door. Upon entering the cabin, a gruesome sight befell him. The home had been ransacked, and instantly in his line of sight, Schneider saw the body of Fritz Stelzenrieder, who was sprawled out in a pool of his own blood, with his skull crushed and 3 of his fingers having been severed and scattered nearby. On a bed in the same room, his wife Anna lay lifeless, with her throat having been slit and her skull crushed, presumably by a blunt object. Heartbreakingly, the couple's infant daughter, Anna, was wrapped up in her mother's arms, also deceased, with a fatal injury to her head. 3-year-old Karl was found beside them, with a heavy, bloody injury to his face. It was reported by the Belleville Advocate newspaper at the time that mother, son and daughter had been murdered in their sleep. Exploring the cabin further, Schneider discovered that Fritz's father, Karl, had been brutally attacked, lying in puddles of blood. His throat had been slit from ear to ear, with the wounds to his neck so deep that he was almost decapitated. The sole survivor of the attack was the family's faithful dog named Monk, who stayed with the bodies all night. He was known to be aggressive towards strangers, therefore it was assumed that, with lack of noise that night or any blood evidence on the canine, the killer was familiar to the family. Initial examinations concluded that the family had been slaughtered the previous night on the 19th of March, with all of the bodies being stone cold when they were found bludgeoned. A clue which was reported by local newspapers indicated scratches on the bed's headboard, which suggested that the killer was left-handed, and that Karl Sr. was found with a clump of hair held tightly in his hand. However, police disregarded the latter as hearsay. Approximately $100 were missing, with robbery assumed to have been the motive for the crime. Nothing else appeared to have been stolen, suggesting that the killings may have been a personal crime. Tobacco was discovered in the surrounding area of the farm, mixed with drops of blood, with investigators theorising that the perpetrator had injured themselves during the incident and tried to halt bleeding by rubbing tobacco on the wound. Outside of the cabin, there were drag marks in the mud, presumably made by an axe, and another bone-chilling piece of evidence were footprints left in the dirt by boot heels shod with nails. They followed the trail and arrived at the front door of a Mr. Frederick Bultz. Frederick Bultz, brother-in-law of Anna Stelzenrieder, had apparently fought over money which he had borrowed from the family, and he was notoriously rebellious. The only other clue that pointed the blame to Bultz was that the bloody tobacco was found in the direction of his farm. No other evidence incriminated him, yet he was put in front of a jury. He was forced to look at the bodies of the deceased, his face becoming sickly pale upon the sight. The jury closely examined all evidence put to them, finding Frederick not guilty of the slayings. He subsequently sued the Stelzenrieder's estate and received $400 in compensation. Shortly after his trial, he abandoned life in Saxtown and lived the remainder of his life in anonymity. Speaking with friends, neighbours and locals of Saxtown, Fritz allegedly told of a potential inheritance from a relative in Germany, but no evidence was found to back up the claim. Others believed that Fritz and his father were in a bitter dispute with a family member in Germany who had not paid the pair money which they were due. There were whispers of a possible love triangle, although the parties who were involved in the alleged relationships were never identified, if true. The Stelzenrieder's estate was reported as being worth several $1,000s, with police believing that they were murdered as a way to extinguish the lives of all potential heirs to the fortune. John Afkin, a big-built and intimidating man who occasionally worked for the family, was in a dispute with Fritz Stelzenrieder and was looked at as a potential suspect. His job required regular use of an axe, and he was feared by locals due to his infamous aggressive temper. It was stated he owned an expensive watch, extremely similar to one which had belonged to Carl Sr., and whenever people inquired about where the timepiece had come from, he would refuse to answer. The clump of hair found in Carl Sr.'s hand was allegedly red, which was the same as John Afkin's. Like Frederick Bultz, he was not charged with the murders due to lack of evidence and lived the rest of his life as a free man. Up to 10 individuals in total were arrested by police in regards to the Saxtown axe murders. However, none were prosecuted. The family of one of the suspects tread carefully when the suspect was in their final days of life, going to great lengths to keep people away, allegedly in fear of the individual making a deathbed confession. A private detective managed to spend an entire night hiding beneath the floorboards of another suspect's home in hopes of hearing him confess in his sleep, but his efforts proved fruitless. Unfortunately, the Saxtown axe murders have never been solved, with the person or persons responsible avoiding detection for the rest of their lives. Initially, the family were going to be buried in a plot at Walnut Hill Cemetery in Belleville, with their German relatives having paid for the construction of an obelisk. However, residents of Saxtown and church elders strongly opposed the idea, blocking the path of the gravedigger who was forced to abandon his original job. Their wishes were respected, and the Stelzenrieder family were buried in Freivogel Cemetery near Millstadt, with their funeral service being attended by over 1,000 people who bid them a final farewell.